Welcome back to the Meta Britain channel and to another political time capsule stream with myself and Arron Hook. Hello, sir.
Hello, thank you for having me back.
Pleasure. And so, of course, last time it was just yourself and myself talking about our political sort of birth, current ideas, and so on, in part to see how they might fare in years to come, as per the name, political time capsule. But this time it'll probably be a part two of two. We're going to have a look at some contemporary politics, lead our way up uh, toward a context which I think completely explains where we are now and why some of the politics right now, in this very moment, as of recording, are happening the way they are. And we'll be starting off with talking a little bit about old Margaret Thatcher, the Iron Lady, who of course, started her first term in office, leading the Conservative Party in May of 1979, and started off with a bit of a rocky time economically. I believe it was the IMF that we had to get a bailout for, thanks to some typical Labour misallocation of resources. Is that all right?
Yes, that was in '76. Essentially, the economy had been sort of stop go since the early '60s. So the Macmillan government in about '62 and '63 had been having economic problems, and that continued under Wilson in the late '60s, and then Heath, and then Wilson, Callaghan, and that sort of the IMF intervention sort of loan in '76 was sort of the end of what's called the post-war consensus, really, which is full employment, Keynesian economics. Well, a commitment to full employment, I should say. And Thatcher is, so from '76 up until '79, you have the Callaghan government, the limping on with. There've been two general elections in '74 where the Conservatives had lost their majority, and then Labour. That was in March, and so between March and October, Labour was in a minority government. Then they just about got a majority of a handful of seats in the October '74 election. But then between then and '78, they lost their majority due to by-elections, and so that government was sort of limping on, being kept in power by an agreement with the Liberals, and the country was between sort of '76 and '79 in a parlor state. The economy was sort of going from one crisis to another. The trade unions were uh, very much trying to get as much as they could out of the government, and there's essentially it was a sort of constant auction of the government would refuse to raise. At the time, they had incomes policy. The government set the income for people working in particular sectors, and every time the trade unions would want an increase for their members, the government would reduce. The trade unions would go on strike. One of the one of the private businesses would then do a deal with the unions, increasing agreeing to their demands, and then the rest of them would follow, and the government would have to sort of back down, and then it just kept going on like that until you get to the winter of '78, '79, when you have the winter of discontent, where everybody, including the nurses at St Albans Street Hospital and the gravediggers, went on strike, and the country came to a halt, pretty much.
Yeah. So not great, really. And with such turmoil, had to come some change to the system. It's
Yeah,
been running that way for quite some time. Indeed, you say the post-war consensus had sort of run out, really, of steam. And
yeah,
so in comes Maggie Thatch, and yeah, for three consecutive governments, tries more than anything really to fix that system. And one of the methods of change there comes really in the second government, 83 on, where you get what is now, of course, called post hoc Thatcherism, but of course at the time was really either monetarism, or essentially even just the Chicago School of Economics, a la Milton Friedman, with a long prior backing of the sort of Austrian School of Economics as well, which was to do what is also now known as sort of neoliberal policies of forced free market capitalism, and not really allowing there to be much of any sort of, well, so it's not protectionism, but self-generated protectionism out of the unions. Yeah, there would be union busting and all the rest of it, as we of course all know. There were many, many, many strikes, and even though the economy did sort of get back on its feet, it had been changed quite a bit in many ways, which we don't really see a huge change in for the better today, I don't think. But it sets the tone for massive fiddling with the economy, not necessarily even for the better. And so we'll skip John Major, go straight to Tony Blair,
Yeah,
past the grey man. And Blair, of course, has his own ism, Blairism, although in this case it's mostly describing the sort of managerial bureaucratization, the quangocracy, Quango being, of course, the quasi-autonomous non-governmental institute, the public-private partnership all throughout, the use of all sorts of methods, quotas, to try and force change within the system, with the economy being mostly just leveled out by this point. He really wants to make a legal and ideological change. And of course, what's going to come with this as well is a larger change in demographics. And so Blair is often pointed at having been the one to open the floodgates, if you will. But we can't put all the blame on Blair, as we also know, of course, that this was all built upon laws that were changed somewhat through 1984 and so on, and that falls slap bang in the middle of Thatcher's premiership. And we see again kind of a through line through Liberal or Labour disasters, conservative efforts to fix certain things, particularly the economy, but seeming to ignore some of the worse bits that were changed and not undoing them. And Blair is just another typical Labourish attempt to muck up something that had been basically all right, basically fine. But with, I think, the first time ever, a real dash of Toryism thrown in there. He is obviously often called Blue Labour or Labour Right. And I don't know, he seems to have simultaneously pleased everybody at the time, and made a disaster of everything since. In hindsight, there are not very many people who take his name kindly, except for a few Kosovans, perhaps.
yeah,
Thank you for bombing us.
yeah. It's with Blair. It's interesting. He is the product of a development with Labour that actually goes back to the 50s, where the idea was that you didn't need to have the commanding height to the economy. So when Labour gets its constitution adopted in 1918, written by the Webbs, who were two of the founding members of the Fabian Society, very much there is a clause 4 which is about nationalisation. And starting with Gateskill in the 50s, there's very much a sense that that's not the way you do it. You do it through change of social policy. And you see this particularly in Anthony Crossland's book, The Future of Socialism, published in 1959, where he essentially advocates that. And that's what there is an attempt to do that under Wilson. It doesn't succeed because the Labour left has still got considerable power. But then in the 80s and 90s, when the Labour left is truly defeated, and that Blair and Mandelson and Brown all take power inside the Labour Party after John Smith's death in 1995, essentially enact the future of socialism, as it were, from by Crossland, where it becomes purely it's a cultural. You bring about change in society, equality, egalitarianism through cultural and social changes by government, not economic ones. And so that's why Blair and Brown didn't do much when it came to the economy, from different from Thatcher, because to meet their ideological ends, they didn't need to. And so it really is Blair is the culmination of sort of very much Anthony Crossland, and to a degree Edmund Dell. Edmund Dell was a Labour MP during the 60s and 70s, and he later went on to leave the Labour Party because he went to his, in his view, too left. And he wrote a book about the history of Cancer of the Exchequers, in which he said, I can't remember the exact word, but it was essentially the exact phrase. I can't remember what he said verbatim, but essentially he said, until Labour until Labour accepts capitalism as the only system and loves it, it won't succeed. And so with Blair, you very much saw that the famous words from Mandelson, which have been repeated recently, given his more recent downfall, shall we say, that he didn't mind if people got filthy rich, and that's because they were going to change the country socially and culturally, which is far more effective than doing it economically in many cases.
Yeah, it seems that essentially they had to come to terms with something of a necessary synthesis of the prior system being an often labour-led movement of unions and the workforce, working people, and so on, and nationalisation being a positive good. Then essentially just say burning itself out, running out of steam, being met with relatively radical monetarist policy set from Thatcher and the quote unquote right, the free market liberalism right, the neoliberal. But then, of course, by Blair, without that change, without the snapback towards nationalisation and so on, and protectionism for workers, all this sort of stuff, workers' rights, British workers' rights. Yeah, in hindsight, people should have been less excited and a little bit more scared because some of those changes coming in were going to be quite sneaky, and ultimately as well, the way that at the very top, if you run the parliament, which has a primary purpose really of legislation, then you don't have to be going around and making art house films and spray painting walls and running around with chanting, stickering and leafleting and pamphleteering, essentially picketing. You just change the laws. And that's what was going on for years and years and years and years and years under Blair. I believe it was a new law every few minutes on average, if you count all the clauses and so on,
Yeah,
for the whole, 11 years that he was in?
yeah.
11 years and 57 days.
I think he passed more laws only within, I think, only the first 5 years of his government. So he's from 97 to 2007. He passed more laws in the first 5 years of his time in power than all the British government combined, going back to the first Prime Minister Robert Walpole.
Yeah. And the particularly interesting element of that process was that he wasn't necessarily throwing in a billion totally new laws, but was actually sort of centralizing and conglomerating and editing all sorts of old laws. And so it's a little difficult sometimes to track quite what all the changes were. I remember seeing a documentary, I think it was from Lucy Worlsley or whatever her name is, where she actually visits a room in Parliament where there are all the physical books of law and shows the several entire new shelves within the large room of new and changed law. And I can imagine there being essentially, a third of the books representing the law as written just chucked out and burned. Another third being totally rewritten. And then, about 50 times the original number being written up, fresh. And it all culminated in an attempt really to have a digital ID system to push through indeed multiculturalism, keep running with the neoliberalism, all sorts of things, and a lot of foreign adventurism, shall we say, for our special relationship, the other side of the pond, closest ally, etc., etc. Um, and yeah, we all know, of course, as well, despite was it 1 million or 2 million people? I think it was 1 million people that marched in London to
Yeah,
try and stop the Iraq War, Gulf II. That didn't stop a thing. That was going to happen. And we know even more so in hindsight with certain things coming out, certain people admitting certain things. It truly was just a total fabrication, essentially. Full on adventurism. And I should go back and add as well, quite like Thatcher's monetarism, rather, again, led by America. I should say that with the anger towards Thatcher, fairly understandable, but not entirely, the fault of one. Reagan misses out on any of that hate. The deindustrialization per capita over in America, in the Rust Belt particularly, just as much. It's pretty much perfectly equal on a graph to the
yeah,
deindustrialization of Wales and the North, particularly in England and Wales. And so, Reaganism is strangely not as disliked. And yet we see this continuum in England and Britain and contemporary politics here of the isms of the previous catching a lot of blame despite, well, it kind of being largely downstream of America for a lot of things. Not to put any whole blame on America for anything that happens here necessarily, but we can just see the rhyming of history again and again there.
yeah, yeah. Actually, one thing I will bring up, and where I will disagree with you slightly, is about the foreign adventurism and the American influence. That actually, in some ways, it was the opposite. When Blair gives a speech at the Chicago Economic Club in 1998, where he explicitly connects the sort of reform, social and cultural at home with humanitarian interventionism abroad and regime change, and that's something that the Americans at that point even are very the Clinton administration is very sort of skeptical of. And you actually get in the press at the time, in the American press, and saying that Blair is the leader of the free world for saying this sort of thing. And so the new Labour foreign adventurism is very much its own. The push for that and support for that is very much its own thing. That is very much grown from their beliefs, and it's something that the Americans then, through the neoconservatives, when they take power under George W. Bush in 2000, that's very much when their two come aligned. So it's not that, in that case, it's not the British are influenced by the Americans per se, or it's more that the two come to the same, they sort of merge, as it were, after 2000 and after 2000, March 2001, when George W. Bush becomes US president.
No, yeah, that's quite right. I mean, the thing that I would visualize it as is a sort of double helix. We can
Yeah,
see time and again, uh, America prior to World War One was not really anything other than itself. It was genuinely isolationist, and then it wasn't. It got pulled into the very last few months, really, of World War One, the Great War, and then it went back after the Great Depression to a fairly isolationist stance again. America First comes about, and yet again you see them getting dragged into World War Two, and of course Churchill has a part to play in that. Um, and as roles switch essentially as the sort of global or Western hegemon to America, that tends to flip over, and we tend to get asked or be made to go into their adventures. But again, being a sort of double helix affair, Blair is very much partly to blame. So great. Thanks, Blair. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.
And so I think we'll just skip straight on then past Brown, who was only in for a very short amount of time in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah.
But things did not go well economically again. The Labour typical thing of buggering up the economy basically happens.
Yeah.
Because, of course, Brown being more of the socialist type than the sort of pure neoliberal Blair, took all of 2 years essentially to bugger it up completely. So David Cameron comes in, and it's an immediate reset back to the continuum of Thatcher and Blair. And as ever, the misunderstanding of the previous administrations and what seemed to potentially work for them is just run with. And so we see the multiculturalism idea is simply cemented instead of undone. It's just taken and mutated in essentially, again, a misunderstood way. And particularly with this government having been formed with the help of a coalition with the Liberal Democrats, that is even worse so. My thoughts on Cameron are essentially that he is exactly what he said he is. That is, to quote him, the heir to Blair, or somebody said that. It might have even been Thatcher who said it. But
Oh no, Cameron said that himself.
Cameron, it was Cameron himself. Thank you.
Yeah.
Which is just everything you need to know. The Blairite synthesis of sort of rightist economics with sort of leftist cultural, societal frameworks really see no change, just a horrific mutation, misunderstanding, and so on. And, well, that's something you see at the very beginning of the government. I believe it's what he called the A list or something, where he lists out a load of sort of underprivileged, underrepresented classes of people. This is proto-intersectionality, proto-woke from a Conservative Prime Minister. And it lists people such as, I do believe, Liz Truss. My memory here is slightly foggy, but it lists all
Yes.
sorts of people.
Yeah. No, with Liz Truss, well, that's quite funny. There's a very funny sort of the mini scandal that goes on is that she's selected as the MP for somewhere in Norfolk, I think it is. And on the A list, so the A list for the people just to make it more clear that the A list is a set of people who get sort of preference to become a Tory candidate, and women are obviously one of the big ones. And Liz Truss gets selected for this constituency. However, it then turns out that she happened to be having a relationship with somebody in the association, and that may have given her even more of a brittle leg up. And so there's a controversy in the constituency association, and this actually gets this is big enough to be reported on Newsnight, where the constituency association that's opposed to Liz Truss is nicknamed the Turnip Taliban, and and there's a very funny clip on Newsnight where. I think Michael Crick was the political correspondent up there. He's speaking to Jeremy Paxman, and then Michael Crick at the end of it says, "Oh, and the chair of the association wants to know, Jeremy, when are you next coming up to Norfolk to do a bit of shooting?" Because apparently they knew each other.
Incredible. Yeah.
Yeah.
And there we are, just in the typical Conservative tradition of scandal. It hits fairly quick off the bat there.
Yeah.
And I just brought the list up myself, and there's a few interesting names, a few quite recognisable ones. But one that actually happened to catch my eye, which again, I've not seen this list for so long now, I'd forgotten, Dr. David Bull, who was the PPC for Brighton Pavilion and Brexit Party MEP for a very short stint. He, of course, is now helping to front the Reform Party, which brings us to very contemporary stuff, which, of course, we'll get to. But yeah, that was the Conservatives' A list of people. Oh, yeah, in his case, he is a homosexual, so that's why he was there. Very meritocratic. But then again, he's also got very shiny white teeth. So there is that. But then we'll skip Theresa May. Awful. Boris Johnson
Yeah.
is another one worth mentioning because he came in with a very, very large wave of populist support. Populism is now a term which enters the lexicon as well at this point. He is very popular, having been the mayor of London for quite some time, and he's all very blah, 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 typical old Tory boy with his tassel hair shagger, and all the rest of it. He's even had many, many TV appearances on Have I Got News for You and all sorts of things. This is truly the first populist candidate in Britain. And wouldn't you know, comes in on a massive wave of support, manages to get a load of seats back, and wouldn't you know, spunks it all on the Boris wave, which was a massive wave of over 2 million immigrants. As part of a theory now we can only really describe as human quantitative easing, that is to essentially spread out debt along a large group of people. Even though they're not highly productive, you can pin the debt to more people and then spread it out essentially, in the same way that is done with normal quantitative easing. All very fake economic stuff, but nonetheless a necessity thanks to the reaction to the COVID pandemic, which kicked off properly in 2020 with the lockdowns, of which we had several. And there's no point thinking of what a Johnson administration would have been like had COVID not happened, because it probably would have been just as bad, just as drawn out, with few to no changes whatsoever. He ended up partly admitting that one of the reasons he let in so many immigrants during his time, the Boris wave, was because he wanted the papers to think kindly of him, essentially. So the populist aim there really coming back to wound. And as ever, Tory scandal finishes him off really with Partygate, I believe it was called,
Yes.
where fluting the lockdowns and having a party at the back of Number 10, and all sorts of other things as well. People in his cabinet, particularly having trips across the country and so on, for not very good reasons, while people weren't allowed to even go out and walk their dog in some cases without getting the coppers on them. Yeah, Boris Johnson ends in a true, true failure. But what are your thoughts on Mr. Johnson?
Yeah, with the Boris wave and the sort of human quantitative easing, you can pretty much see that as an attempt to have Brexit and not have to make any economic changes to it. But they want to continue to have mass migration, but now they haven't got the access of the EU to keep wages low. They're having to use non-EU migration, and so it's very much something that's in that Johnson is very much a continuation of May. That was something she would happily have done. Sort of, and when it comes to sort of lockdown, with that, I'm less sort of angry. Less sort of critical of Johnson because I've got to be honest. Any prime minister who was in power at that point would have done the same thing. So sort of, and the Partygate scandal to me sort of is slightly ridiculous. The thing that brought him down was the fact that that really brought him down was the fact that he happened to on his birthday have essentially it was literally a small gathering. I think there were only about 4 or 5 people in the room with him to cut up a birthday cake. So yeah,
Yes, indeed. Quite right. I say the whole thing of would COVID not have having happened or a different person having been in change things much? I don't think so. I think it was a system error once again. I think at this point we can see that the sort of neoliberal attempt has almost started to dry up a little bit. I should indeed have mentioned it. I've totally forgot. I mind myself about Brexit. That's the thing that killed off Cameron.
yeah,
He had called the nation's bluff by taking the years and years and years of campaigning from MEP Farage to leave the European Union, something which had been entered in Thatcher's premiership.
Oh no, in Heath, we signed he signed the accession treaty in 72, and then we formally joined it. What was in the EEC on January the 1st, 73?
Oh, that's true. The scroll back down to Cameron. The the Cameron
Okay.
bet against the country was lost, and
Yes.
the Brexit vote came through in a referendum. Wouldn't you know, when you actually practice democracy, things don't go the way of the managerialists. Wouldn't you know? So
Yeah,
people voted for more sovereignty.
yeah, and it didn't Brexit. One thing that people have to understand about voting leave was it wasn't just voting against the EU, EU membership. EU membership was just an emblematic of voting against the entire political order that had been in since pretty much 97. That it was the repudiation of that, and that's everything in British politics is downstream of that since the 24th of June, 2016.
Indeed, yes. And I remember the whole Brexit thing taking up every single bit of news for years and years and years. And then, of course, we had a small gap of other things happening. And then we had the COVID news for years and years. And yes, obviously that finishes off Johnson, as I say, really, somehow. And as the Tories at this point have become addicted to, they simply swap out the Premier for another with Liz Truss. How that happens, we don't necessarily know. But again, it seems the last failure of keeping up democracy, because there is a race between her and one Rishi Sunak. And it's put down to, I believe it's a party membership vote.
Yeah,
And Truss nicks it right at the end by the skin of her teeth. And she gets all of 50 days, and famously is outlasted by a cabbage or a lettuce.
lettuce.
Lettuce. So again, the turnips, lettuces, it's
Yeah,
not going great. Cheese, etc. So then the Tory establishment seems to get what they want, with Truss having gotten kicked out for another sort of mess up with the mini budget with Kwasi Kwarteng, the uh, supposedly unconnected but obviously highly connected leaders of the Bank of England, essentially kicking up a stink there and saying it'll crash
yeah.
the whole economy. The gilts, are going to explode and all the rest of it. And so, yeah, again, they swap out one out for the other. Rishi Sunak, they get their man in. And my theory for him is they simply have him there to speak to everybody like their children. Don't blow anything up further, please, and just grandfather the death of the Tory party in so that somebody else can come in and take over the reins, essentially, that being one Keir Starmer. So, any thoughts on that handover, particularly? What's your idea on my theory there, perhaps, that
Yeah.
Sunak is only there to grandfather out the Tories?
I don't think he's there to grandfather them out, but he is definitely there, the chosen successor to Boris Johnson. Even before Johnson goes, I remember what after the sort of I can't remember the name of it now. There's this during lockdown. There was this thing about female journalists writing articles about how attractive Rishi Sunak was, and it was Dishy Rishi was the name that kept coming out because of it. And so he was, by let's say by about mid to late 2020, he was seen as the man who would be Boris Johnson's successor. And so, as you say, Liz Truss's election as leader was an upset, and it was upset to sort of the Tory grandees who thought Sunak's our man, so he's going to become leader. Yes, and so and so they do, along with the Bank of England, sort of get rid of Truss. But I think he's in some ways Sunak is a reversion to May in some ways. There is a sort of boring, sort of being in office but not necessarily in power and just continuing on with things, as opposed to Boris, who as much as I dislike him and dislike his policies, he was proactive, whereas Sunak was sort of reactive, just sitting there doing nothing. And I think, yeah, so it's a matter of he was a reversion to the norm, as it were, that Johnson
Yes,
had been sort of uh, diversion from.
precisely. I think, as with where we started off, saying that when Thatcher came in, it was thanks largely to the previous system essentially having just run out of steam to a degree, failed or whatever. And then you get Blair as a strange synthesis of things. You work your way through to the 14 years of Tory misrule, and you start off with Cameron, the heir to Blair. You get boring, teary Theresa May. You get
Yeah,
rah Boris Johnson. You get loony Liz Truss. You get dishy Rishi as the guy who's, say, just not part of that. He's not truly, he might even be one of the least memorable in the grand
yeah,
scheme of things. Um, and indeed, as per my theory, it's just because he buggered up things the least. He wasn't willing to do anything.
yeah,
He was in power for almost 2 years, and it's like he was never there.
yeah,
Um, so that's where of course, we get the inevitable Keir Starmer appearance, and we're currently living through his governance. It's been a total bonfire, of course. There were horrific things happening in the very first few months of his premiership. Axel Rudy Cabana being one of the worst ones, of course. Um, and the murders, him as a second generation Rwandan immigrant, murdering several little girls and stabbing several others, and then the ensuing riots, and then the ensuing thousands of British people arrested, uh, kind of spelled the not so great time that he was bringing in. It seems that, again, the previous system, as much as you can try to just keep it steady, keep it normal, keep it running, will not die silently. Some other actual big change has to come about. And my theory, of course, would be that, of course, we're going to see that come at some point. But uh, whether that be in the form of reform or restore or the Green Party, even, we have yet to know for sure. It's a little bit too early to call it. But my Keir Starmer, I say it's not even been 2 years yet, and things are not going well. But on a scale of 1 to 10, perhaps even comparing just the Tory leaders we had from Cameron to Sunak, 1 to 10, how good against them do you think he's actually doing?
uh, min- minus everything. I mean, he well, whatever you think about any of the Tory prime ministers between 2010 and 2024, you can say they all had some imagination and they all had political skills. They at least could manoeuvre themselves about. Even Theresa May and even Liz Truss, despite how things ended, they had political antennae and they could see which way the wind was blowing and they tried to go that way. Keir Starmer lacked any of that. I mean, yeah, there's a book that was written about him getting into power called "Getting In" by two journalists from the Times. And the thing they point out about him is that he does not, for example, he doesn't understand the Labour Party. He thinks factionalism is stupid, and he doesn't, in the words of I think Peter Mandelson, do politics. He thinks ideology is somehow morally wrong, and so he's not even an ideologue. He's just sitting there administering stuff, and the stuff that's gone through in terms of the government is people have mentioned in the press about Morgan Sweeney. It is really that him, and they put around him, providing the ideas that Starmerism doesn't essentially exist. It's it's McSweeneyism in a way, and so Starmer is he's less a prime minister or a politician than an administrator who somehow stumbled into number 10. And he cannot react in any way to the events going around him, and but there's a bigger problem with his government that the Labour Party has misunderstood the situation, which is they were, because in the run up to the 2024 general election, people were saying, "Oh, this is going to be a repeat of 1997." When Labour got its large overall majority at the 2024 general election, they thought, "Oh, right, this is an endorsement of us. This is like 1997," and it really wasn't. It was the 2024 general election was very much the epitome of the old adage that it wasn't the opposition winning the election; it was the government losing it. And so they've just gone from one scandal to another with increasing unpopularity because the public weren't enthusiastic about them. And the, the barely 2 years they've been in power has sort of done more damage, more so even than Brexit, I would argue, to disillusion people from the political order because there's no sort of uh, possible alternative that's seen as saving the system. You mentioned just that the alternatives seem to be reform, restore, or the Greens. And whatever your view of any of those three, they're definitely a break with what came before. At least since the break with the period since 1997. And so that I think one thing that is good about Starmer and the current government is they finally broken the spell, as it were, that the current order will not last. Won't survive Keir Starmer.
Oh, I quite agree, yes. And we can trace back through all of these things like the sort of neoliberal element, the managerial element, all sorts of things, even the increasing technocracy, which Blair attempted, and even Blair attempted to put through Starmer in the beginning, which was actually dropped to a degree, or even further slowed down. What will go, I wonder, because particularly looking at what is sort of the current favourite in our group, really is kind of restore Britain with Rupert Lowe, and he seems almost to return to sort of Thatcher, which would be an interesting reset because the thing that brought her in to begin with is not necessarily what we have now. And whilst he's not a Thatcherite per se, nor is even Farage, there are definite differences. There'd have to be. The core ideas there are certainly remaining. Economics, sort of freedoms, all sorts of things. And that could potentially be quite a hit against the managerial element. If the government is shrunk, taxes are shrunk, and all the rest of it, we might get some of it just out of our hair. But it seems less so now that the economic things, as bad as the economy isn't anywhere near as bad as it was then. People aren't literally
No.
freezing. You know, Starmer can take away the winter fuel allowance, but then he can give it back again the next year later, I do believe. But
Yeah.
then we sort of just come on to the real elephant in the room, which is the demographic situation. I believe we've got about 2 years, as of current stats, before the birth rate in Britain is majoritively foreign people and their descendants. What then does a country even mean if it's not its people? And that really is the kicker, at least since well, where even do we go back to pin the blame? People like to pin the blame on Blair, obviously. People also tend to agree on Boris Johnson's Boris wave. That's the largest single influx we had. But is there really any one person to blame, any one party, any one era even, or ideology, do you think? Is it down to Blair? Is it down to Boris Johnson? Is it down to neoliberalist policies, multiculturalism? What could possibly have actually caused this that a new government could come in and destroy?
Yeah, I think in terms of the demographic change, it's very much not just Blair, but broadly post 97, because the immigration laws, the immigration system from, let's say, the passage of the Immigration Act 62 up until 97 was roughly stable. And if it hadn't been changed after 97, we wouldn't necessarily be in this situation demographically. So I wouldn't blame Blair solely. I would say sort of Blair-led order since 97 is to blame for it. But and just to go back to what you said about the economy, you're quite right. Things are nowhere near as bad as they were in '79, and you could make a few changes, and things would actually improve, and that actually makes it easier for a government, let's say, reform or restore, to do other changes, because once the public are feel like they're all comfortably off and they've got some spending money in terms of their own personal income, they will give whoever's in power and done that leeway to act in other ways. And so, dealing with the economy, which won't be that difficult, um, would allow you to deal with other things, particularly the demographic issues we're having.
Indeed, yes. And it's often the case, I think, that it, it tends to be, I think, that a large amount nowadays in the complex system we have, the civilization spanning system, even the world spanning system post globalization and globalism, of course, we really are in a place where um, there's no easy way out, to put it one way. Um, the way that people who've been brought up to think, particularly post Blair, I'm a child of Blairism completely. Um, I've known nothing. I've known no other system in my life. So, those of us now essentially entering politics, or at least here on the sort of meta political, the outside of the politics, looking in area, don't see much else outside of it. And so, a lot of the things going on now are, regardless of whether they are or not, the worst it's ever been, the economy worst it's ever been for us. But one thing that is objectively true outside of that absolutely is the demographics, where it is the worst it's ever been. And that will, I think, be the thing that has to go first. Usually, I think, say, the economics is upstream from social, cultural changes and all the rest of it. But before even then, it's just the people in general. The people in charge, first and foremost, the people keeping them in charge, and all the rest of it. The people that feed into the economy, the people that create and eat up the culture and so on, the people that are the society. And when you have people like, let's just be frank, David Lammy as the now deputy prime minister, uh, it just goes to show uh, how bad things are in that respect. And I don't think we
Yeah,
will see any positive change in anything until it's not those people uh, in power, basically. And so, no matter what we say or do, whatever theories you might throw out, there will be no positive change until there are basically good British people in charge. They could come from whatever flag they fly, but it seems obviously pretty likely that it's not going to be the green flag. It's not going to be the yellow flag. At this point, it would be a bloody big stretch to say it's the red flag. Uh, you know,
yeah.
and likewise the blue. So that leaves the other shades around that hue of the color spectrum. Um, and so we'll cap this off, I think, with a little guess, bet, whatever prediction. Who's going to win the general election of 2029?
I think at the moment it's likely to be reform, but I think that Restore Britain may start to get bigger parliamentary sort of sort of group there. But I don't think you're going to see that split in the vote that some people are claiming, because Rupert Lowe, but whilst there is sort of obviously sort of public, some members of the public know who Rupert Lowe is. They've known who Nigel Farage is for far longer. They've known who Reform UK are far longer than they've known Restore Britain. So I think, yeah, it's going to be Reform winning majority, with Restore having let's say Restore will at the next general election have 5 MPs, and how things develop after that is going to be interesting. But I'd say that Reform is definitely going to be definitely going to win an overall majority.
Yes, the likelihood is definitely that way. It would be hard to find anybody on the sort of right or the not left who doesn't seem to think it. And up until a few months ago, I had thought, that being late 25, I thought that actually, do you know what? I have a fairly strong feeling that Labour will actually get it back because there'll be too much of a split along the entire rest of the political spectrum, and then being a very much establishment party, and the Conservatives not being able to bring it back around in time quick enough, somehow just about would have clinched it, maybe with a coalition, with the Lib Dems particularly, them being the coalition party and all. The pull in case of emergency switch. But with the recent happenings, it seems that there are now, as people say, splits on both the left and the right of the spectrum. It definitely won't be with first past the post that Restore get a majority. It definitely won't be that they get more than 50 MPs. Quite certain of that, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But they can get as many as Reform won the last time round. Seems absolutely right.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I would say anywhere between 5 and 50 might be a relatively all right thing. Depends how things go. But, yeah, as of right now, I would say the chances of who gets in probably will be Reform. Secondarily, I stick with Labour, believe it or not. I can't fully explain it, but there is an establishment and non-establishment thing. And I think the old two-party system, essentially of establishment and establishment, is going to be non-establishment up top and establishment second. I just have this feeling. I can't fully explain why necessarily, other than the terms I'm using. You might be able to pull some meaning from it, but I don't think it'll be non-establishment and non-establishment. It just cannot be that there is a Reform UK majority government with a Green Party shadow cabinet and all the rest of it. I just don't see that happening somehow. So I have a feeling it'll actually be Labour slotting in second, and then the Greens, then the Lib Dems, and then the Tories would be my guess, and then indeed Restore. But Restore being on the board is pretty cool. So,
Yeah.
holding out our hopes for a political solution, but we extend no more hope than that necessarily. But that, I suppose, does wrap us up with all of the contemporary politics, everything that's led us up to here. I thank you for any historical corrections. And yeah, that's another time capsule sealed. We'll open it back up again, perhaps, in years to come. How about that?
Yeah.
And it'll probably have a great stink to it too.
Yeah.
But this time there'll be no Jimmy Savile memorabilia or any such thing. All right. I would obviously put any listeners towards Mr. Hook's channel. We've got obviously more great stuff and Metabritain appearances over there, but I believe there's some a new series you're launching at the moment.
Yes, it's going to be called the Cheap Seats Podcast, where each week it's going to start sometime in March. I'm not quite sure when, but it will be a film commentary. So myself and a guest that week will be it'll be literally like it used to get on, like you get on DVD and Blu-ray extras, an audio commentary of a particular film. So I've got a couple of episodes in the can at the moment. I've just got to organise for the first episode, which Meta will be hopefully involved in. But the first episode we do have to re-record for one reason or another.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Lovely
but
stuff.
yeah.
Alrighty then. So I think, yeah, we'll wrap it up there. That'll be a nice long one again. Thank you, anybody, for listening to the end. And also our goodbyes.
Bye.